Good morning. Good morning. It is really early here on Thanksgiving morning. I've had something rolling around in my head for several weeks, a number of weeks. And I woke up and felt like I needed to get on it, right? So I'm sitting here with my buddy, a little cup of coffee, going to dig in the word a little bit. And I hope you'll join me. What what I've really been pondering, and part of this is prompted by some discussion that was going on my Patreon and the Telegram channel, and part of it is from some of the X conversations that have been going on recently. Now, of course, y'all know from some of my other videos that the whole Rich Tidwell blow up got a lot of people's attention and a lot of discussion about marriage and headship and patriarchy and all these things. But it always goes back to, or those conversations, particularly when you're having discussions with Christians, those conversations always go back to, well, that was the Old Testament. Things have changed. We have different laws. And then you start digging a little bit more into that conversation. And the next thing that happens is they say, well, God changes the laws. They didn't really have all the laws from the beginning. They only got those at Mount Sinai. And before that, it was different. And a number of years ago, when I began understanding all of Scripture, not just the parts that Christendom approves of, when I started understanding all of Scripture, I came to a place of recognizing Adam and Eve had the Torah. The Torah has existed since the very beginning. God's standard of righteousness has never changed. It's never been different. It hasn't changed today. So what I want to do is I want to share some scriptures with you. In the very large framework, I know it's very common, and naysayers will say, "Oh, Pete, you bring that up all the time." But I think the very first place that we need to go, and I hadn't even thought about this until just 2 seconds ago, but the very first place that we need to go is to Matthew chapter 5. And so what I'm going to do is I've got share screen, and then I've set up um, another camera here so that as I do things, some of this you can see on my Bible. Right now it's open to Genesis 4, and we're going to go there in just a second. But I'm going to run to Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to look at something very quickly. Yeshua, Jesus, Mount Sinai, I'm sorry, the Sermon on the Mount is having a conversation, and he's telling them, he says, "Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets." Okay. He says, "Don't even think this." Now, a lot of Christians think that what he says is, "Do not think. Do not think." Or they say, "Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to abolish." And they interpret this word as annul, abrogate, abolish, do away with, everything else. But there's a distinction between "I did not come to abolish, but to do something else." And this fulfill means to bring to the full. It doesn't mean bring to an ending, right? Doesn't mean complete in the sense that they don't happen anymore, but he's coming to teach them in their fullness, to show them in their fullness, to display them in their fullness, but it doesn't do away with that. An example is if I drive through town nearby and I keep the speed limit all the way through town, I have fulfilled the speed limit, but I didn't do away with it. I just did it properly, right? And I've demonstrated that it can be done properly, right? That's fulfill. That's what fulfill means here, is to bring to the full. But that's not the verse I want to draw your attention to, because in the same breath, he continues and he says, "Truly, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished." This is until heaven and earth pass away. Now, anybody who reads their Bible knows there's future prophecy. There are even things that the Messiah said would happen that haven't happened yet. So we know that A, heaven and earth have not passed away. B, all is not yet accomplished. There are many things yet promised in Scripture. Okay? But that's not what I want to attract your attention to. This is what I want you to see right here. He says, "Do not think I came to abolish the law of the prophets." And then he says, "Whoever annuls one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same shall be called least." Least. Just see that. Shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Annulling or teaching people to annul commandments will get you the special reward and the high praise of being least in the kingdom. That's not Paul's words. That's not Isaiah's words. That's not Moses's words. These are coming straight from the mouth of the Messiah. He says, if you annul, and if you teach others to annul even the little commandments, you will be least in the kingdom. Now, Christianity teaches that whole chapters, whole books, some people will say the law's done away with. That's the Old Testament law. No, no, no. It's all still there. Every single letter and every single letter still applies. Sometimes we have to understand how it applies. But that's not even a difficult conversation once you simply accept it all applies. Once it all applies, now we have to figure out how does it apply. Okay? Christendom teaches that it's done away with. You will hear that come out of preachers' mouths, done away with. Right? We don't do that anymore. That doesn't count. It doesn't matter. And they're liars. They are liars. Every single one of them. I'm telling you. So I want you to understand, annulling and teaching to annul will make you least in the kingdom. But how do you be great in the kingdom? To be great in the kingdom, you keep and teach the commandments. Keep the commandments and teach the commandments. Often the question, though, is, well, God changed the law. Things, some laws didn't happen until Mount Sinai. And that's really what I would like to dispel today. I'd like us to talk about, let's take a look at this. Let's see if there's scripture evidence that shows us that the law was there, that they had all of the law before Mount Sinai. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. We are going to, let's see, we're going to come over here. Let's see, I can't do that on this screen, can I? I'm going to have, yes, I can. Look at that. Here we go. So what I want to do is I want to take us to Genesis. And the first place that I'd like to go is I'd like to go to Genesis chapter 26, because right here is a very important passage right here. Right here is Isaac has just received the we say the kingdom. He's received everything from Abraham, and this is the point at which Yahweh is beginning to deal directly with Isaac. And he tells him, Isaac appeared to him, right? Appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Stay in this land which I tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will." Okay, the Father's making some promises. "I will be with you and bless you, for to you and to your descendants I will give these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and I will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed." Because. This is a very big word right here. Because. He says, because Abraham obeyed me, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my Torah, my laws, right? Commandments and statutes and laws take charge to. But commandments and statutes and laws, these are words that we see very often um, in terms of all the commandments from Mount Sinai. And yet here, the Father is saying Abraham did this. He kept these. That's really interesting. Abraham kept these. So, what did he keep? How did he know? How much did he have? When did he get it? Where did it come from? All of these things are questions we should ask. So, what I'd like to do is I'd like us to go back to, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go to Genesis chapter 4. And we're going to start looking and find evidences that they indeed had all of the Torah. I believe they had every jot and tittle, right? So let's now take a look at figure out. I'm playing with some new stuff here, and I'm trying to figure out how to do some switching. I know what I've got to do. I've got to go back over here. This is the button that I'm looking for. Right here is the story of Cain and Abel. We're familiar with Cain and Abel, and when I first started to walk in understanding all of Scripture, I started seeing things in Scripture that I'd never seen before. And I learned to ask questions. A lot of times you're taught to read Scripture, but don't ask questions, just accept it. No, you need to ask questions. I want you to ask questions. The Father wants you to ask questions, okay? But look at this. Let's ask some questions. And I'm going to switch over. I think it'll be easier for you to see on Blue Letter Bible. So let's do that. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 4. Quick way to get there right here. We'll just bounce over right quick. Genesis chapter 4. And I've got my Bible with my highlights, and I've got notes here as well from my blog. And I'm going to show you something in just a second from my blog so that you know where to go get more information. If you go, I'll post the link to a couple articles that I've done on this very teachings I've done on this very subject in the show notes. But if you go to notsov.com, it is, and use the search bar, there's about 2,000 posts or articles or things that I've put in there, and you'll find all kinds of stuff. I'm sure there might be a gem in there somewhere. Definitely worth your time to go dig through lots of teachings over there. And I'll take you to one in just a minute so that you have an idea. But let's take a look at this. Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4. And it says, now the man had relations with his wife Eve. She conceived and gave birth to Cain, right? Cain. And she said, I have gotten a man child with the help of Yahweh. Again, she gave birth to his brother Avel, and Avel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to Yahweh of the fruit of the ground. Avel, on his part, also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions, and Yahweh had regard for Avel and for his offering. This verse right here ought to make your head spin. Why? Well, here's something that's happening that's very interesting. Abel brought of the firstlings of his flock. Where did he get that idea? How did he know that what Yahweh desires is the firstlings of the flock? Because we see this in Leviticus. It's spelled out for us in Leviticus, right? But further, it says, of their fat portions. That is also spelled out in Leviticus. How did Abel know? Right? There's more in this story. There's a lot more in this story. But how did Abel know? Christendom but either doesn't stop and consider this, or they have to go with, well, God must have told him, or Abel just had a pure heart. He just knew. Now we're going to find out that Cain knew as well. He had a wicked heart. How did he know? Right? Yahweh had regard for Abel and for his offerings, but for Cain and for his offering, he had no regard. How does the Father have the right to have regard for one and not for the other if he's told neither what his desires are? He is an Elohim. He is a God of just weights and measures. He doesn't expect us to know things or hold us accountable. Where there is no law, there is no sin. Well, is Cain committing sin here by not bringing the right thing? It's obvious that the Father regards one and not the other. So Cain became very angry and his countenance fell. We've got to ask questions, though. How did they know? Then Yahweh said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it." Sin. According to 1 John chapter 3, verse 4, sin is lawlessness. So the only way that Cain can sin is if there is a law that he is breaking. If there is no law, there is no sin. So how is it that sin is crouching at Cain's door? Have to ask the question, right? So Cain told Abel his brother, and it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. This is murder, right? We know, thou shalt not commit murder, right? Then Yahweh said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" He said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth." Cain said to Yahweh, "My punishment is too great to bear. Behold, you have driven me this day from the face of the ground, and from your face I will be hidden, and I will be a vagrant and will want and a wanderer of the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Why does Cain think others would kill him? Does he understand that the penalty for committing murder is death? It's a death penalty issue? Hmm. How does he know? You see, I think that Adam had the whole Torah. I think he had the whole thing. Now, some will say, "Oh, but Pete, you're just looking at these couple verses." No, we're going to go through Genesis. There are lots of places that it gets really detailed. The practice is very detailed. They know exactly what's going on. I think Adam had the whole Torah. Now, I have given other teachings where I believe the case can be made that the Torah existed before creation in its fullness. Because if you think about it, Yeshua is the lamb slain before the foundations of the earth. In order to be the lamb slain before the foundations of the earth, he had to understand what the penalty was going to be and what the sin was going to be and what the cost was going to be before the foundations of the earth. And so the Torah existed, the standard of righteousness, which comes straight out of Yahweh's character. It is his character. The standard of righteousness existed before the foundations of the earth. The law is spiritual. Something that's spiritual exists outside of what we see as space and time. It stands outside of that. It's with It's with the Father. It's an expression of his person, his character, his nature, his righteousness. It's always been there. Okay, so here we go. Whoever finds me will kill me. So let's take a little bit of fast forward here. Excuse me. Need more of the Gojis. Let's jump forward to Genesis chapter 6. It came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. So there must be something going on in the heavenlies, and there's a lot of other teaching that could come out of this passage. But this is what I really want us to focus on. We're not going to delve into Nephilim today. Then Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So what is the definition of wickedness? How could God judge them and say that's wicked if they had no standard of righteousness already in place? We know that Noah, I think, are we told in Peter or Jude maybe that he was a preacher of righteousness? I want to say that's a phrase that sticks out in my mind right here. That he was a preacher of righteousness, and I don't want to get sidetracked. I need to look that up, but I want to say that Noah is called a preacher of righteousness. And that's going to tease my mind. I'm going to have to go that up a little later. It's either there or Jude, if I'm not mistaken. So, as such, what is Noah teaching? Why is Noah righteous when these others are acting in wickedness if there is no standard? What is the standard? We've already demonstrated that Cain and Abel understand what the firstlings of the flock are, what the fat portions are when you bring a sacrifice. We know that Cain understands that murder is wrong. We know he knows that the penalty for murder is death. And now we're told that just, I don't know, what, 10 generations down the line. I don't remember how many generations there between Noah and Adam, but it's not many. 10, 12 generations, some long years. It's been 1,500 years, something like that. Maybe at the beginning of Noah's life, because I think Abraham was born in the 1900 window, something like that, right? It's so big questions here. Where do they get this idea of wickedness of man was great on the earth, and every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually? There has to be a standard. The Father can't arrive at that judgment without a standard being in place, and those who are doing it knowing that they're doing wrong. Genesis chapter 6, verse 5. Let's go to verse 9. Oh, well, it says it right here for sure. Noah was a righteous man. What is the definition of righteousness? Where do we get the definition of righteousness? See, I think in off the top of my head, is it in Deuteronomy chapter? Let's go over here right quick. I want to say it's in the either 4 or 8. Deuteronomy chapter, it's probably chapter 8, where no, chapter 6. Look at that. See, I flipped right to it. Let me change screens here for you so that we can see this. Go here. There we go, right there. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Right here it says. Let me push that up so you can see this. Yahweh commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear Yahweh our Elohim for our good always and for our survival as it is today. It will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all this commandment before Yahweh our Elohim, just as he commanded us. Righteousness. It's righteousness for us if we're careful to observe the commandments. That's what this says right here. And we just looked over here at uh, Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. These are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with Yahweh. How could he be declared righteous? Except that he was keeping the Torah. He had it. He was holding on to it. He was following it. So let's see. We've got more examples. We're going to go to the next chapter. And right here it says, you shall take, after Noah has built the ark, enter the ark, so on and so forth, you shall take with you of every clean animal by sevens, a male and his female, and of the animals that are not clean, two, a male and his female. How does Noah know what a clean animal is and what an unclean animal is? It doesn't say, I'm going to bring you animals, and whichever ones are in sevens, those are your cleans. Whichever ones are in twos, those are your uncleans. No, Noah already knows what's clean and unclean. He's told, this is what you're going to do. Get the clean animals by sevens, pairs of sevens, and the unclean by pairs of twos. Why? Why? Well, partly because when he gets off the ark, some of the clean animals need to multiply rapidly because some of them are going to be used for food. Clean animals by sevens. That's going to be deer, sheep, goats, cows. Yeah. Food. Sacrifice. We see he sacrifices too, doesn't he? As soon as he gets off the altar or gets off the ark, he builds an altar. And that's the next chapter that we want to look at. Chapter 8, verse 20. How does he know? How does Noah know this? How does he know what the right thing is to sacrifice? Noah built an altar to Yahweh and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. How did he know? How did Noah know? This is the question that we have to ask, because as we ask it, it drives home the point that they had the Torah. They had all of it, every bit of it. And I'm going to prove this before we're finished, right? We'll go on to chapter 9, verse 23. We come on over here, chapter 9, 23. Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and walked backwards and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were turned away, so they did not see their father's nakedness. How did they know it was sin to look at their father's nakedness? And how was righteous Noah justified in cursing Ham? Now, if we read Leviticus chapter 18, we understand that Noah's the nakedness of their father is not Noah being naked; it's Noah's wife being naked, right? The nakedness of Noah's nakedness is his woman. We understand that if you go look at Leviticus chapter 18, you can see that starting in verse maybe 7 down through around 17 or 18, right in there. It's used multiple times, and it's a reference to the woman, right? So, how did Shem and Japheth know that it was wickedness to look upon Noah's naked wife? Doesn't say it's their mother. It's entirely possible that their mother was deceased and Noah had another wife, right? This is how Ham had relations that brought about. See, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. This actually, right here, I think Canaan was conceived as a result of this event. That's really where this comes from. And that's why Canaan gets Canaan gets the curse, right? He's cursed because he's the product of an incestuous, or a product of adulterous. He's the product of adultery. Ham takes Noah's wife. That's a different study for a different time. But here's the point. How did Shem and Japheth know? How did Noah know that what Ham had done was wickedness, and how was he justified in cursing Canaan? But wait, there's more. Let's go to Genesis chapter 13. Okay, we're going to run on over here to 13. Easier to flip it like that since we're just proceeding through verses. Genesis 13. This is the story of or the beginning of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? But in after Abraham and Lot part ways, Lot goes down to the valley and he moves his tents as far as Sodom. Now it says right here, this is the same question that we have from Genesis chapter 6. The men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against Yahweh. Now, something you find in Ezekiel chapter, I want to say it's Ezekiel chapter, let's see, I've got the reference written down as a side note here in Genesis 13. Genesis 13. No, it's actually written down in chapter 19. Sin of Sodom, right there. Ezekiel 16:49. It's written right here in my margin. I thought it was Ezekiel 16, but I wanted to be sure before we go over there. Go to Ezekiel. In fact, I'll go Ezekiel 16:49 because y'all need to see this more clearly here. Ezekiel 16. And if we run way down here to verse 49, it says, "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had arrogance, abundant food, and careless ease, but she did not help the poor and needy. Thus they were haughty and committed abominations before me, before I removed them when I saw it." Listen, there are a lot of people that say, oh, Sodom and Gomorrah, that's where we get sodomites. They were all homosexuals. And they may have been, because that is an abomination that comes along with abundant food and careless ease, right? That's something that comes with that. However, and that's part of why Western civilization is dripping with this, because life's not hard enough for most people. It's too easy, and so they no longer reverence or feel like they need God or any of his laws. But here's what the real sin of Sodom was. It wasn't the homosexuality, it's that they weren't helping the poor and needy. So how in Genesis chapter 13, where we just were, go back here, Genesis 13, the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly. How could God hold them accountable? How could he hold them accountable for not keeping his laws, taking care of the poor and needy? There's so many laws written, simple things about widows and orphans and poor and needy and taking care of those who have needs. How did they know? How could he hold them accountable for a law that they didn't have? Or did they have it? This is something that we need to talk about, right? Something we need to know. Now, let me show you something right quick. I'm gonna change the screen. I don't think I can't do it that way, can I? That's still share. So I'm gonna share a different screen here for you. And stop the screen share. We're going to, let's do this. I'm gonna share a different page here. Part of what I'm drawing on right here is from an article on my blog. I mentioned my blog a few minutes ago, notsov.com, right? And the address with just tons of articles right there, notsov.com. And I started this blog way back in the day when I started seriously digging into scripture and recognizing that there were inconsistencies in what I was being told by the church and what I had learned in seminary. I have a seminary degree. At the time I had been in the pulpit for 10 years. And I started doing some hard studying, saying, wait a minute, I've got to figure some stuff out here because pieces don't fit. They're holes. And when I did, this blog came out of it, and all of these kind of articles, putting pieces together, right? And part of what I'm looking at right now, what we're talking about right now, comes from this particular article. And then there was another article, in every article, I guarantee you, every article that you read is linked to other articles that I've written. For example, I did an article that's and scripture references all of these. Each one's connected to more articles, and if you go all the way to the end of each article, there's always other stuff here, right? Definition of righteousness, the gospel I never preached, in Abraham by faith really means, all of these. And some of these, date all the way back into the beginning of 2013. So the article that we're looking at right now today, that's kind of the base for what we're working on, I wrote in June of 2013. So it's 11 years ago. Okay. So let me come back to our scripture, right? How did they know? So if we go now to, this is where things get much more interesting. We can go now to Genesis chapter 17, which actually already appears over here. Genesis 17. And there's so much in Genesis. You see, I've got all kinds of things in my Bible, the years, all these connectors and pieces and notes and margin stuff. It's important to understand that if you don't have the foundation, if you don't understand Genesis, you can't understand the rest of Scripture. You won't get the pieces right. You won't put it together correctly. That's a fact. Christendom usually, somebody comes to faith in Jesus and they say, oh, you need to read the Gospel of John, right? That's where they want to start them. Start them in the Gospels. Nope. You got to go back to the beginning. What book do you pick up? Any book on the shelf. What book do you pick up and start reading at the 37th chapter? What novel, what story do you start reading 3/4 of the way through and then think when you get to the end of the book that you understand the first 3/4 or that you even understand the story that you've seen, that you've read? It can't be done. It's not even possible. So here we go. Let's go back to Genesis, and we're going to go now to Genesis chapter 17. All right. So let me get my screen back up here for you. And we are going to take a look at Genesis chapter 17. Genesis 17 says, now when Abraham was 99 years old, Yahweh appeared to him and said to him, I am El Almighty. I think is what that is. It's probably, El Shaddai. Okay. Walk before me and be blameless, complete, perfect, having integrity, right? Walk before me and be blameless. What does it mean to walk before God? What is the definition of being blameless? And how did Avram know? How did he know? How did he know what was expected of him? Now, there's a really cool book I saw in here as I was scrolling for some of my notes earlier. There's a cool book by, his name is Asher Intrater. Asher Intrater, titled "Who Had Lunch with Abraham?" And one of the cool things about it. Now, this isn't the lunch incident right here. It's actually the next chapter is the lunch incident, if you will. We'll talk about something from chapter 18 in just a second. But I have marked all through my Bible every time it says that Yahweh appeared. You'll see this over here. I typically have all of those circled right here. See it in my Bible. See that right there? You can see it over here in the corner. It's barely off camera right there. Yahweh appeared. Very important to notice that. The Father's having direct conversations with Abraham. What do you think they talk about? I guarantee you they're talking about his commands and his Torah and how to walk them out and all these things. And Abraham's not the first one receiving them. Abraham gets clarification, maybe. They have discussions. Abraham's his friend. What do friends do? They sit there and, maybe chew the fat, hang out a little bit. But also, if I'm with someone who's much wiser, I'm asking questions. I'm listening. I'm paying attention, right? So we have this right here where it tells us that Yahweh challenges him to walk and be blameless. What does blameless look like? How does he know? He's got the Torah. He's got all of it. I'm going to prove that in just a second. We'll prove that in just a second. Let's go to Genesis chapter 18. Go to 18. And this is the case, where he had lunch with Abraham right here. Yahweh appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre. And it's down here that Yahweh and two angels, two messengers come with him, and they spend time with Abraham. But I want to take us down to 19 to 25. And we just covered this in Torah portions recently. And I think this is an amazing passage where Abraham actually negotiates with the Most High. How good of a friend do you have to be able to negotiate with the Almighty? There are a lot of people out there that they will talk bad about Abraham. In fact, most of Christendom talks bad about Abraham. Oh, he didn't have enough faith. That's why he took Hagar. He acted wickedly when he took a second wife. You're talking about the friend of the Most High. Yeah. And those whom you bless, I will bless. Those whom you curse, I will curse. Right? For those who curse Abraham, speak lightly. If you go back and look at the Hebrew, it says, if people speak lightly of Abraham, God says, I'm going to curse them. He comes with a hammer for that one. He comes with a very strong word right there. But Christendom just loves to throw Abraham under the bus. Anyway, 18 verses 19 through 25. For I have chosen him. So this is actually a conversation going on between the men who are visiting with Abraham, Yahweh and the angels. The men rose up from there, looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. Yahweh said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So he's having this conversation. He says, for I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his house after him to keep the way of the Lord. What is the way of the Lord? What does it mean to keep, to guard the way of the Lord? By doing righteousness and justice. What's the definition of righteousness and justice? Where do we get this? How do we know? Abraham knew what righteousness and justice looked like. It's keeping the Torah, it's being obedient, it's loving your neighbor as yourself, it's doing all those things of righteousness that are in the Torah, so that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken. This right here. How did he know? What is the way of Yahweh? Right? Paul said, I am a sect, or I am a member of a sect of Judaism called the Way. He identified himself. He said, I am a Pharisee, but he also identified himself as being a member of a sect of Judaism called the Way. In fact, we need to go see that. Let's see. That is in Acts. I come over here. I've got to use my hard copy. I know my hard copy, right? Acts chapter 24. Is that right? 24, 25. 24, right there. Right there. Let's go to Acts chapter 24. That is verse 14. Christendom thinks Paul was doing something different. He wasn't. He kept Torah, and he taught Torah. If you misunderstand, if you don't know Torah and you misunderstand Paul, it's because you don't understand what he was doing, right? This I admit to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, I do serve the God of our fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the Torah and that is written in the prophets. That's Paul, testimony of himself, right? And this is testimony of himself before a court, right? Right? So he says he's a follower of the way. And this is the same thing that's going on with Abraham. Yahweh says, keep the way of Yahweh. And you can find that little phrase attached to Torah in Psalm 119, if I'm not mistaken. But I don't want to get sidetracked because I'm going a little long here, but I really want to make sure that we get this, we understand this, because this is very, very important. So let's go to Genesis chapter. We're going to go back to Genesis 26. Genesis, let's just put this up here and add our 6. Genesis chapter 26. We already talked about this passage right here. But the promise to Isaac, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and give your descendants to all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because, right here, that really big word, Abraham obeyed me, literally, hearkened to my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Abraham had all of it, and he did it. So let's see if there are some other little details that would point us to understanding. We can go back to Genesis chapter, is it 19 where we were? And I'm not 100% sure where this is in 19. I probably got it marked in my hard copy. Let me look at this right quick. Genesis 19, verse 3. So the two angels show up, or the two messengers show up in Sodom, and Lot urges them to come into his house. He prepares a feast for them and bakes unleavened bread. And if you go look at the sequence of events that happened before this, the angels just met with Abraham. Here, this is a Passover story. They actually eat matzah. That's what it says here, matzah, the Hebrew. If I'm not mistaken, let's go double check this. prepared a feast. Yeah. Okay. Unleavened bread. Matzah, right there. Matzah. Right? Fed a matzah. That's a this is a Passover story, right? Being led out and the angel of the Lord destroying the city, saving the people. That's not what I want. I want to go back to where I just was. Back to, and that's why didn't it let me do that? Oh, here we go. Okay. So they go right back to, it's a Passover story. Why were they keeping Passover? How did they know? Why does Lot's salvation or salvation out of the city happen at Passover? Why did the destruction happen at Passover? Same thing as it's a precursor to what happens in Mitzrayim in Egypt later. They were keeping the feasts. There are other indicators that are a little more subtle as you go through Genesis, indicating that they had feasts, that they knew the feasts. Indicator even that Noah at second Passover was when he went into the ark. We understand that his grandfather, Methuselah, probably died and he was unclean and couldn't keep Passover initially. He comes out of the ark during Sukkot. Amazing. The Father has a schedule, timetable, and he does things according to it. So let's jump to chapter 38. And this is one of the clearest indicators that they had the whole Torah, because this gets into the nitty-gritty. Some details right here that are worth looking at. And I'm going to flip over in my Bible here to make sure I don't miss a couple things, because I know I've got them marked over here. See, y'all didn't know I have a cheat sheet that I keep close to me. But look at this. All right. The story of Judah and Tamar. This is a fascinating story. But the first thing that we understand at the beginning of this is that Judah and the boys understand levirate marriage. We don't see that until Deuteronomy chapter 25, but they understand levirate marriage, right? So he has 3 sons, and then takes a wife for his firstborn, the wife for his firstborn. Her name is Tamar, right? And then his firstborn was evil in the sight of Yahweh, so Yahweh took his life. What's the definition of righteousness? How is it that he's evil enough that the Father's justified in taking his life? So Judah responds by telling Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law and raise up offspring to your brother. Look, he tells him, you go do the levirate marriage deal. How did he know? They had the whole Torah. In Genesis, they had the whole Torah. This idea that, God came up with a whole new law when they got to Mount Sinai is false. They received the same law, the same commandments. But here's the point. In receiving the command, it became a national covenant versus an individual covenant, right? This is each having an individual covenant with the Most High. It became a national covenant, or covenant for the whole family, right? So we have this. So Judah obviously knew levirate law, but that's not all. If we go on down here to chapter 38 of verse 24, 3 months later, Judah was informed, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she is with child by harlotry. Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. Okay, so what is the penalty in Scripture for committing adultery. Adultery is death by stoning, right? However, there's an interesting command in Leviticus chapter 21, verse 9. I've got my note right here, my Bible. So let's go to Leviticus chapter 21. Leviticus 20, that's 23. That'll get us close. And then we'll just bounce backwards. Two quick ones. Oh, that's not what I wanted. All right, let's do this. 23. Is that it? 21 is what I want. Leviticus 21, verse 9. And these are regulations for priests. Well, why am I taking you here? The common understanding is that Tamar was the daughter of a priest. At the very least, what we know is that when she was at the side of the road and presented herself to Judah for services, right? She may have presented herself in a manner where he believed that she was a temple prostitute. Either way, it would connect her to the priesthood, right? The other way being that some say she was the daughter of Shem. Maybe, maybe not, don't know. Okay, some of that comes from tradition. But it says that the daughter of any priest, if she profanes herself by harlotry, she profanes her father, she shall be burned with fire. That's the reference that Judah is making way back in Genesis 38. He says, bring her out, let her be burned. Okay? Genesis 38. Is that not what he said? Let's go back and look, right? Genesis 38, verse 24. She's played the harlot. She is with child by harlotry. She's supposed to be Judah's son's wife. Selah, right? Bring her out and let her be burned. How did he know? But let's go further. Judah recognizes them, and she said, when she brings out the cord and the staff and says, these are, this is the signet ring and the staff, he recognizes that she's more righteous, and he says it. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not have relations with her again. But what's the standard of righteousness here? How does he know that she's acting righteously? If we go another verse, Joseph, did he have the Torah? Right here. Came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Yosef, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house and has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his woman. How then shall I do this great evil and sin against Elohim? Excuse me. How would I do this great evil and sin against Elohim? How did he know? Right? The Joseph portions are my favorites. But how did he know? How did he know what was evil in his sight? And a sin against God. So, those are examples. And there are more. There are more. Here's the point. The law of the Lord is perfect, and it's everlasting, and it hasn't changed. It remains the same. The standard that Abraham had, the standard that Abel had, the standard that Judah had, is the same standard that they had at Mount Sinai. If you go look in Exodus chapter 16, before they get to Mount Sinai, who is the first person to mention the Shabbat, seventh day, Sabbath? Who's the first person that mentions that? Go read chapter 16 and figure out who mentions it first. It's not God. He doesn't mention it first. Now, he instituted it in Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. But it's not God who brings it up. Which is why when the commandments are given 4 chapters later, Exodus chapter 20, why Moses says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, set apart. Because it was that way from the beginning. And we know from Isaiah chapter 66, verse 24, I think, that the Sabbath day will be going on in the new heavens and the new earth. So, guys, I really appreciate you. I thank you for hanging with me. I thank you so much for the encouragement and support. I especially thank you for the support that we receive through our patrons that help support this channel, help support this ministry, and receive benefit as well from having additional teachings and additional things, and a closed community where we can communicate, where we can learn, grow together, all that kind of stuff. So I would encourage you, study the Word. But if you've ever had the question, does the Torah still stand today? I can tell you, absolutely it does. Every bit of it does. Some things you may ask, well, what about sacrifice? And I've talked about this in other videos. Sacrifice still stands today. The conditions to do it righteously have been suspended. We don't have a temple, we don't have a priesthood, but we are told in some of those laws or some of those prophecies that Yeshua says must be fulfilled. We're told in Ezekiel, we're told in Zechariah, we're told in some other places that there will be sacrifice in the future. Yep. That's a tough pill to swallow for Christendom, because they think, oh no, that's all been done away with, all that bloody sacrifice, and they'll have this conversation over a steak, right? Fried chicken. Yeah, man, preacher was good today, talking about how the law's done away with. They don't have a problem eating meat. But we'll have that again in the future. There are lots of reasons for sacrifice besides sin offerings. Yeshua is the sin offering. All sacrifices point to him from the past and from the future, right? They all point to him. But to keep the Torah righteously, there's sacrifice. And it will happen again. I'll let that one rest with you. You'll have to wrestle with that one, and we can talk about that in the future. I've talked about it before. I've got a video on sacrifices in the millennial kingdom. If you go back hunting for that, I think the key words in my channel would be sacrifices and millennial kingdom. You could look that up. All right, guys. Listen, I love you. I pray that the Most High bless you. I pray today's Thanksgiving Day for those. This is probably the only holiday that is not biblical that we observe, because the early founders of this nation were celebrating Sukkot. They were celebrating Sukkot. Go look it up. William Bradford. They were celebrating Sukkot. And we are thankful. We're thankful to the Most High for everything he's given us. We're thankful for a place that we can practice our beliefs, our understanding. We can walk Scripture in righteousness as we wait for the day that he returns us to the land. But yeah, anyway, I bless you. For Kingdom, I bid you shalom.